Today I will share how I use gesso and why. Gesso is used to prime and prepare the canvas surface for paint application. It serves many purposes. For example, it can greatly change the texture of the canvas. It can make a toothy canvas into a level surface more suitable for smoother brush strokes. As you can see here, I have applied 5 layers of gesso on the blank canvas to arrive at this smooth finish. The number of applications depends on each artist's tastes and needs. A toned canvas can also help us determine the right values of colors. A stark white canvas interferes with our correct perception of colors. They can look too dark or too light. A canvas painted with a neutral colored gesso alleviates this problem. Now this surface is ready for realistic painting. And it helps the paint to stick better to the canvas surface and prevents chipping of the paint. I always start with stirring the gesso with a palette knife in case pigments have settled at the bottom. I use the palette knife to scoop out gesso and place it in a mixing container. I use metal containers because they are very easy to clean. I use a pea-sized amount of acrylic paint in roughly 6 scoops of gesso. Then I mix them very thoroughly. Unless you know the contents of your gesso very well, I suggest using as little paint as possible for this step. You don't want to compromise the integrity of the gesso formula. This particular gesso is okay to use with both acrylic and oil colors. You can take a 12 cm brush to apply gesso, but I think it leaves more streaks, so I take the widest sponge brush I can find. I use this old pencil box because I can close the lid to prevent the gesso from drying out between painting sessions. I suggest you take a container with the lid to mix your gesso as well. I start with saturating my brush with gesso on both sides. Don't worry, gesso is very viscous and it won't fall out of the container. I make a couple of dabs with the brush to cover a column on the canvas. With a zigzag motion, I spread it even further. Then with a few sweeps, the gesso is evenly applied. I devised this method because gesso dries very quickly on the canvas. I work column by column and don't go back on an area already covered in the same session. I save corrections for the next pass. To wrap up everything nicely, I finally cover the sides as well. I immediately wash my brush after each session. Gesso dries very hard, and it would be impossible to remove from the brush once dry. In the meantime, I will let my canvas dry for 30 minutes. I make sure the brush is completely dry with the help of paper towels before the next use. Now I'm painting my second layer. The canvas dried for 30 minutes and I made sure there were no wet patches. Here you can see how the toothy texture of the canvas disappears before our eyes with each brush stroke. This direct sweeping motion is another way of applying gesso, but it's not my favorite. You should choose what feels more comfortable for you. I will let this layer dry for 30 minutes and then gently buff the canvas with a 240 grit sandpaper. What grit you use depends on how smooth you want your canvas. After many experiments with different coarsenesses, I have concluded that the 240 grit sandpaper works best for my purposes. I paint realism, so I like a certain smoothness, but I also like the texture of the canvas slightly visible through my artwork. This is my 5th and last layer of gesso. I'll let this canvas dry for a day and then it's fully ready to take on paint. I hope this video helped you. Thank you for watching. Bye.